Hey, what's up YouTube? Here I'm with my BMW M3 F80, a completely practical family mover. You can see there are handprints on the sides. Yes, I've taken the car seats out, put them in my other car, but normally there's two car seats right here. Here we have a Vorsteiner diffuser and a Remus catback exhaust, along with the Remus non-resonated mid-pipe. And as you can see here, I have the stiffening plate out, the rear wheel well plastic parts out, and I am getting ready to replace the oil pan gasket, which is leaking. I discovered it when I took it into BMW for a well check. The only problem with taking out the oil pan gasket is you have to support the engine somehow. So that's what this is. This is an engine support bar. Purchased it from Harbor Freight for $72-ish. And you can see that it sits on the frame of the car, not on this, which is cosmetic. Couldn't support anything serious. And it hooks into, yeah, it's a tow hook. But it's not the tow hook that comes with the car. The tow hook that comes with the M3 F80 only fits the front and rear bumper. You need to purchase a tow hook that would normally be reserved for an E30 M3, and there's a bunch of part numbers that cross-reference with each other. But the point is, the one that comes with your car doesn't fit the S55 engine, so I had to purchase an additional one, just so I could support the engine when I take out the subframe to get to the oil pan. Okay, so to get access to the subframe, you have to take out the rear wheel well cover on both the front, left, and right tires. And there are no less than 4 different types of screws, bolts, or caps that need to be removed in order to get access, or in order to remove this component. You need a T27 Torx bit. Got mine on a 4th inch driver, 4th inch ratchet. Oh, so much dust coming off this. All right, 3rd type of bolt. Okay, last are these plastic push rivets. Gotta be really careful not to damage these. So I first thought that I was going to use this nail set, tap it in, push the rivet through. And that's what I did on the other side for all 3 of these. And you can see it gets it started, but it doesn't take it all the way through. So taking a 2mm, the 2mm hex bit. It doesn't matter if it's hex or it's Torx. I'm taking this and using it because it's thinner and it's longer. And then I think you heard that push rivet centerpiece fell to the bottom, and we'll recover that. There it is. Listen. There it is. And we'll recover that when we pull out this wheel well panel. I'm really trying to be gentle and not break anything. There we go. So I never knew that was there. Look, there's a gasket on that vent. There you go. And then we can recover the centerpieces of those rivets, those push rivets. There are 3 of them. So what I do to reuse these, let's just take store them like this, get ready to use them again. And I said at the beginning there were no less than 4 types of screws or bolts that secure the wheel well cover, the rear portion to the car. And there's actually 5. There's one of these. This is a T27 screw with washer. There are these types of push pin rivets, and then there is one of these. These are more common. You see these pretty much everywhere on the car. And then a 10mm nut with washer, plastic, and then the typical 8mm screw with washer that you see everywhere on the car too. So 5 different types of screws and pins and stuff securing the wheel well to the car. A lot to remember when you're putting this back together. All right, and to get the front of the subframe off of the car, I'm going to need to remove the front wheel well protective cover, as well as the front side panels as well, belly pans. There's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plastic pieces on each side, and that's after you remove the stiffening plate that you need removed to get to the subframe in whole. Alright, and there are a total of 6 screws with these fender washers holding the front plate in, and we're taking those out now. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6 line. There's 7. And then you pull out the panel like this. You gotta push forward and then out. Or push into the car, and then you can pull it out. There. You get a sense of how much road grime has accumulated inside of your car over the years. Alright. And on each side of the car, there are 2 smaller belly pans here that cover the top portion of the frontmost portion of the subframe. There's 4 screws holding those in. There's 2 that are 8mm back here, and then there's 2 way off to the side here that are 10mm. And we're gonna get those now. And you're going to need to mark the configuration right here. So the bolt that's further in front, the furthest up front, looks like this, 10mm. There's no flathead screw. There's no place to put in a flathead screwdriver. And then the bolt that's a little bit further back, you can put a flathead in it. That's definitely something to remember. And I'm actually going to store this with the bolts still hanging out in it, just so I remember the configuration. So after you've removed both side underbody panels here, you'll have to remove this center protective panel covering one of the radiators up front here before you can get complete access to the subframe. So I'm going to remove that now. You need a T40 to hit 2 bolts on each side right here. And then connected to this plastic plate are 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, I don't know yet, Torx screws that are holding on the front splitter. Well, there you go. You should probably support it as you're taking it apart. Okay, and now you have complete access to the subframe. And I am going to store this panel upside down on the side of my garage with all the bolts still in it. And this is the only way that I can keep track of the 100 or so bolts and screws and nuts that I've removed just to get to this point. So. inside underbody panel in one piece. You can see we didn't take off these two plastic rivets that are connecting these two pieces. We opted to remove the plastic rivets that were back here, attaching it to the rear wheel well because, well, there was just more metal to get a better grip and less of a chance of ripping any plastic like we did on the other side. So. All right, looking under here, you can see that's the engine mount right there, and there are 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3, that I'll have to release before I can drop the subframe. Okay, now that we've removed the bolts attaching the engine to the engine mounts, we're going to raise the engine approximately 10 millimeters using the engine support bar. And this is where greasing these threads previously, I think, is really going to make a difference. It should be pretty easy. I think that's going to do it, unless we run into some problems while removing the subframe. I think we've supported the engine well enough. All right, before removing the subframe, you have to disconnect the power steering module, and there's 2 plastic connectors. You need to be really careful when taking these off. If you break these, I don't know. I'm sure you could just zip tie them back on or something, but that's not a good thing. So be really careful when taking these off. This first one, we're gonna take off the most delicate connector first with these 3 small, 22 gauge wires. You pinch each side, the tab pops up on each side, and then wiggle back and forth. And then the second connector right here, there's a little red tab. You push that out, get a screwdriver in there, then flip it sideways. Make sure it's all the way out. And then you should be able to wiggle this one out. 10 millimeter Torx bolt in here that we need to disconnect before lowering the subframe. I'm just gonna mark with a Sharpie where this connects to make sure that it lines back up when I put it back together. 10 millimeter Torx socket, and I'm throwing it in between the largest subframe cross rail and the tie rod ends. All right, you can see my wrench here, 3/8 poking through the subframe there, and then coming out on the other side. And you can see my wrench coming through there, connecting to the steering column. Okay, and this is what came out. We've just disconnected the steering column, and now we're working on removing the subframe. We're gonna go after the bolt that's attached to the very front of the car, the very front of the subframe. It's right here. This guy, okay? It is not a 12 millimeter, it is not a 13 millimeter, it is 1/2 inch. Careful with that, you could round it out. 1/2 inch on this one. All right, yeah, so I've undone this bolt, and you can see it's not coming out without removing the radiator hoses. So I'm gonna get a bucket and we're gonna drain the system. Are you telling me that this bolt is it's still not gonna come out? Wow. Now, there is what I believe is the ride height sensor that needs to be removed. There's a 10mm bolt right on the other side here. I'm going to undo that. Okay, so I just removed the ride height sensor from the front wheel wishbone, and I almost lost the 10mm bolt that went to it. I didn't hear it drop, and it rolled like 3 feet away. I'm not sure how. This one's really sneaky, and yeah, make sure you don't lose that. All right, so there are 4 subframe bolts on each side that we need to remove. There is a Torx 10mm, and under here there is a hex 18mm. There. And then there's another Torx 14mm. Did I say 10? No, this is 14. 14, and then there's one under here, inside here, another 14. So 3 14 Torx bits and one 18mm hex, which I'm going to remove now. That's one. Okay, there are 2 products that you need to buy in order to complete the oil pan gasket replacement. Of course, the gasket itself, and then a bolt kit. There are 3 different types of bolts that go into this oil pan, and there are 2 different torque specifications between the 2. All screws here are torqued to 6 foot-pounds. Some are then torqued an additional 90 degrees, while the other 2 types are torqued an additional 180 degrees. No big deal. No big deal at all. Not a big deal. Just took the subframe out of this car. Oh dear. I'm in over my head, maybe. Next on the list, there are 3 bolts here. You can barely see the top one. There's 1, 2, and then a third on the top. And that is the transmission oil cooler something. And watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out. And then an additional bolt right, lighting's bad, right there in line. You remove this assembly right here, and then you can get to the oil pan. So we'll remove those 4 bolts and come back. Here's the motor mount. Here's how the motor mount connects to the engine. You have to take this piece off the engine before you can remove the oil pan. And you've got a 10mm Torx socket here. 18mm Torx socket times 4. And then just to really throw you off your game, you've got a 9mm Torx socket needed right here. Boop. Okay, we got the oil pan off. Check that out. So the whole pan was covered in, I think, a piece of the gasket. You can see I've almost got all of it off. The goal here is to make it look like this, perfectly clean. You want the mating surface to be as clean as possible. So I'm hitting it with 220 sandpaper, brake cleaner, wiping it with a rag, and of course using a hose with water to wash some of it away. There's no point in rushing this step. You've come this far, there is no reason to rush it. Make sure the surface on the oil pan and on the engine is perfectly clean. You don't want to do this again. Again, you've come this far, you've done all this work, there's no reason to rush this last and really important step. So I've got the old gasket off now, and you can see this is the old one. Look at the manufacturing on this. See this like perforated edge? I mean, you can tell when this plastic was formed that it wasn't the best mold that it was in. And my best guess on a location of the leak was right about here. And that's where it seems like it gets the roughest, with how this plastic must have come out of a mold. And then you compare that to, well, you can't see it very well, but I am reluctant to take this out of the plastic until I am ready to put it back on the engine. You can see that it is just perfectly smooth. I mean, you can tell that, when they manufactured this new gasket, more care was taken. Alright, next we're putting these cables back together. They mount to this bracket that's on the transmission. There's one cable here that goes to the oil level sensor. I've sprayed each one of these connectors with contact cleaner. We'll get this one on first. There. There we go. Got it. Okay. Put that back on. Okay, so that's kind of a spaghetti mess of wires here. We got it. The torque spec for this, that is the engine mount assembly, how it connects to the engine, okay? 66 Newton meters. 66 Newton meters. So I'm going to torque those down now. All right, a theme I am noticing going through the BMW manuals is that if a bracket connects a hose or a wiring harness to the side of the engine, there's no torque spec associated with it. So for these bolts that go into the transmission oil cooler lines, which pass right next to the engine oil pan, I'm gonna go hand tight and then maybe a quarter turn on these. And there's 3 for that. There's one that connects the hoses, and then there's a module that takes 3 additional Torx bolts. We'll do that next. One bolt goes there, and then in, tight fit. And there's a module back there that has 2 screws on the bottom and 1 screw on top, which you can't see because of a shadow. And when it comes to achieving the torque spec, the proper torque on this subframe, I think you'll be a lot better off with just making sure everything is perfectly clean. So for me, this is the cool part about working on your own car. You can go above and beyond in some respects. Your mechanic, no matter who they are, it's not their car. They're not going to go to the length that you will to maintain something. So in this cavity right here, this is the air vent for this low pressure cooling system radiator. Oh, watch out, don't damage the fins. And it was dirty. It was filled with rocks, bird feathers, a bunch of junk. And it didn't look great from the outside either. You could see that vent was dirty from the inside before. Now it's clean. And, well, I cleaned it out. I blew compressed air in it. I sprayed some plastic conditioner in there and just wiped it out. And now it's perfectly clean, along with my perfectly clean radiator that I cannot believe. You can see it's dented out. There's rocks, stuff that hit it, but it is now clean. There was so much dirt that was just flowing off of this radiator as I was hosing it off. I'm telling you, for like 3 minutes, just nonstop dirt was coming off of it. Really, probably impeding its ability to cool, to dissipate heat. And of course, cleaning the housing as well. And now it'll operate as good as it did new. Alright, it's really hard to get a video on this while I'm doing it. I'll show you now that I've stopped and have a wrench on it. This is how you get to the power steering rod that connects to the power steering motor. The way to get a wrench on it, and it's not super intuitive, is to go between the kind of main rail of the subframe here. You can see where it connects to the lower control arm and the tie rod. So you get your wrench in there, and about 3 clicks at a time, you can tighten it. And then remember, 24 Newton meters is the torque spec. All right, next we are tightening the ride height sensor to the lower control arm here. This is going to be 8 Newton meters. And remember, on the other side of here, there's a place to put a 10mm socket to keep this assembly, the spindle, from spinning while you're tightening it down. So you'll need a wrench, an open end wrench, plus a small 8 Newton meter capable torque wrench. The next step is to attach the engine mounts to the engine. There's 3 screws on each mount, there's 2 mounts, and BMW is very specific. Before you begin torquing, that torquing procedure, which is a mere 19 Newton meters on the subframe to engine mount bolts, you need to lower the engine completely. So that's what we're doing now. So I guess those folks at BMW know what they're talking about, because If you recall earlier in the video, I had pre-tightened all of these. They were snug. They were snug and I was ready to torque them down, but that would have been a mistake because they weren't even close to being all the way threaded in. There's another 3/8 inch on each bolt to go. So very important step. Lower the engine, then torque down the bolts that support it via the engine mounts. And remember, a mere 19 Newton meters. I'm using my little baby torque wrench. Wrong size. Oh my gosh, it's 100 degrees outside. I'm sweating. Okay, how are you gonna get your suspension to stay still while you're torquing it down? This was frustrating me so much. No matter how hard I would hold this in place, it would just slip a little bit. It would just slip enough where I wouldn't be able to get the torque wrench to click, and I had no idea where I was in terms of reaching the torque specification. So what I've done is I've put this piece of wood in between the subframe and kind of the bottom half of the wheel hub here. It took me a while to figure out the right angle. There's about a 15-degree cut right here, and this side is straight. This worked. All right, I'm at 175 foot-pounds. Oh, first, I don't think this center spindle is going to move, but just in case it is, I want to know, and I'll switch to using a crow's foot. So I've marked the position with the marker. All right, here we go. Hit it, 175 Newton meters. Hell yeah, cool. Hit it. Okay, we're aiming for negative 24 bar or more to reach a vacuum in this low pressure cooling system. So we open up the valves here on this Venturi adapter and on the center piece right here. All right, now that my tiny compressor caught up, we'll start it again. We hit negative 24 bar, got a vacuum. And we're gonna wait 20 seconds to make sure that we still have a vacuum. Make sure that the system isn't leaking any air. BMW. This hose goes into the coolant. And we check, are we still at negative 24? And if so, we will fill it with coolant. All right, we're holding. Yep. System's perfect. Now we're gonna fill. It's very important that you keep the tube filling the system submerged. You don't want to introduce any air bubbles into the system. Okay. Go a little further. Okay, we're submerged in bottle number 2. Keep filling. Okay. Drawing a vacuum on the larger expansion tank here. Okay, compressor caught up. Go at it again. All right, we hit negative 24 bar. We're gonna see if it holds for about 20 seconds. If it does, then we're gonna fill the main tank with coolant. Checking, still at negative 24. Man, that is good to see. Okay, ready to draw coolant into the system. Here we go. Okay, that took in about a gallon right there. We're gonna fill it up with more. All right, we're back with another bottle of coolant. Okay, we're zeroed out. Good deal. Okay, after filling the main coolant tank and the low pressure coolant expansion tank using the OEM Tools filling adapter, we're set. We're set. We gotta hook up the battery and then complete a bleeding procedure. Here we are. Okay. All right, we'll tighten that down. Yeah. The car, it's alive. We'll tighten that down and then we'll start the bleeding procedure. Okay, in order to keep, well, here's what's weird. In this bleeding procedure, you have to turn on the low beam headlights and then set the heater to the maximum temperature, and then you turn the blower down to the lowest speed. In order to run this, you probably should hook up a battery charger because you're going to drain your battery, because this takes 11 minutes to complete. It is no short procedure, and it's a very real possibility that your battery could die in that period of time. So best to keep some juice flowing to it. So we're going to hook up this battery charger to this battery, then turn this on to the 2 amp setting, then I'll turn the headlights on, the heater, the blower down to the lowest setting, and then I'll turn this probably up to 10 amps or so. There's a 10 amp setting, and that should keep us from draining the battery while completing this low pressure coolant bleeding procedure. All right, the correct procedure is hook up a battery charger, positive and negative, get it set, put it on the 10 amp charge. You're going to be running a coolant pump. That should work. Turn this to about 20 minutes or so. There we go. Jump in the car. Turn on the ignition. Do not hit the brake. You're not starting the car. Okay, and we turn on the low beams. There we go. Make sure the heater is all the way up. And then fan on the lowest setting. Then hit the accelerator for 6 seconds. The coolant pump, which is right there, making a little whining noise. We know that it is indeed working and bleeding the system. Sounds like a washing machine. Yeah, you can feel that coolant moving. All right, we have confirmed there are no oil leaks coming from the pan, which is huge, huge. That would be such a thing to rework if it did not, if it did leak rather. The next step after confirming no leaks is we're gonna put on the stiffening plate. There are 8 bolts, 16 millimeter heads, and they are tightened to 56 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. So I've got it hand tight now. I'm going to torque it down next.